So you guys call it the Vroom Vroom Veer podcast, right?
Correct. Or just say Vroom Vroom Veer or Vroom Vroom Veer podcast. It doesn't really matter. So yeah, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and do that.
This is Lane Kawaoka from Honolulu, Hawaii, coming from you from the Simple Passive Cashflow podcast on the Vroom Vroom Veer podcast.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Richard Chapo, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer and welcome to the show. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, I appreciate you reaching out and hooking up. So you are at SoCalInternetLawyer.com, and the little thing says Law Office of Richard A. Chapo. So you are a no-kidding lawyer and focused mostly on doing internet business. So talk a little bit about your practice.
Yes. I've been practicing since 1992,
Wow.
Since about 2000. Started working in the internet field. Had a friend who had become a CEO of an internet company, and I was coming back from Russia, of all places.
Wow. We'll have to talk about that later.
I do. Spent a year over there, so I came back, and he couldn't find somebody to help him, so I started helping him. Next thing I know, I was practicing internet law, which is kind of a combination of copyright and various other issues that businesses face when they go online.
Right.
And, it was an interesting area. And so here I am roughly 17 years later, still doing it, and work mostly with small businesses and try and help them avoid, some of the minefields that are out there, so they can go ahead and focus on growing their business.
So the internet really didn't exist in 92. So, right? I mean, so was there an internet in 92?
I think there was, but it was mostly just an academic and military application. Yeah, the commercial internet probably not till, really gets
97,
steamy.
2000, something like that.
Right. Yeah, I think Google finally became Google in 98 or so. Before that, it was a company
Alta
called
Vista and
Backrub, right?
Backrub? Wow. Well,
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that was the original name of Google, and somebody obviously said, maybe we should go with a different name. But you have to remember at those times, we were all still on dial-up, and it was.
I remember.
A whole different world. So, and search engines at that point were kind of laughable. Yahoo was.
Well, there wasn't really a graphical sort of interface to the web at that point. The web wasn't really webby. Right.
Well, it really wasn't.
Mostly because of bandwidth. Right.
Right. You couldn't move data.
Right.
And, the idea of YouTube and all of these things was, something that never would have existed.
Right.
Right.
I remember, there was a text-based version. So the precursor to all of this was like things like CompuServe and America Online, and these sorts of they called them like dial-up BBS type services. And then, so I was doing all of that and I was a sort of like a computer nerd. So I had an Amiga 500 or an Amiga 3000 or something. But then when I was in Florida, so now I have to scrunch my brain to figure out when this was. So I moved to Florida from Hawaii in 94, and I was there until 97. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey, there's this whole new thing. It's called the internet."
Right.
And you have to get on it, right? And by this time, I knew what he was talking about. And I was still, at that point, had my Amiga, right? And again, like you said, we were all on dial-up, and there was no graphical sort of interface going on at all. It was all text. But somewhere between 94 and 97, that's when you had to buy a PC. Because the Amigas, they didn't even do the graphical version of the internet. I couldn't make it do it, but the PCs did. So
well, there wasn't even an agreement on what that the type would be. I mean, what
Right.
The common code would be and what have you. I mean, it was very primitive.
yeah. But you were there. You were there.
Yes. Do you ever watch the show Mr. Robot?
No. Is that good? I watched like a little bit.
It is very good. It has kind of gets a little carried away with the psychosis of the main character, but
Right.
Mr. Robot, the name refers to his father. His father had a little PC shop in the 90s, and it was very much that. They were these initial, very primitive PCs, and he's on the phone with somebody and talking about, how he has the elite cutting edge computer, and it's got 500 kilobytes of memory or something.
I was there. I did all that. Yeah.
Right. It was hilarious. So, well, when I was in the 90s, I was doing litigation for complex litigation, so death, wrongful death, that kind of thing. I didn't get into the internet till 2001 or so, which is probably good. That probably would have strangled somebody.
Right.
Yeah.
That kind of makes sense. So let's go back in time because it's fascinating to me. I know this isn't quite about your business, but it's more about you. What were you doing in Russia?
Well, in the 90s, doing the complex litigation, I was doing wrongful death, as well as some complex insurance litigation. I was with a boutique firm in San Diego called Sulzner and Associates, and I was doing the typical lawyer thing where you work 70 hours a week or what have you, and you have no life. And,
right. Sounds about right.
Yep. I burned out big time.
Vrooming.
And yeah, exactly. And so I was just going to quit, and then they talked me into sabbatical, and so I was looking for something that would just be absolutely, completely different, and found this opportunity to teach in Siberia. It wasn't really, I taught a little bit of law, but it was mostly just going and staring at your navel kind of thing. And so I went, and I didn't speak a word of Russian or anything, and it was it was just an amazing year. It was in a city called Chap-oh, which was a closed city for a while, so there weren't very few from foreigners and what have you. But yeah, it was it's, if you ever want to rejuvenate your life, go live in a completely different culture, where everything is new, because it certainly teaches you humility and what's important and the ability to laugh at yourself. And so it was great. It was one of the best years of my life.
Wow. So what do people do for fun in Siberia? Stay warm. Try.
Yeah. The odd thing about it was in the summers, it was actually very hot.
Okay.
And then the winters, obviously.
Something you never hear, right? I would have never known that. Okay.
Right. And in the winters, it's very cold. So the problem of the year was always in that middle point in spring and fall, when the temperatures would change, 30 or 40 degrees a day, and it would just, you'd get sick right and left. But what did people do? They drink, of course, the famous things you hear about Russia.
Right.
Vodka's really tied into everything. They go camping all the time. They call it going to nature.
Okay. And they drink there, right?
They do. Yeah.
Go in the woods and drink. It sounds very much like my childhood. Right?
Exactly.
Doing scary stuff in the woods with alcohol. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit different than what we think of, because we tend to be a little more buttoned down. So when we think about drinking, it's going out and people getting having a grand old time, and they do that there. But a lot of it was just part of cultural life, maybe more like the French drinking wine all the time. It wasn't like crazed.
It wasn't like intentionally to get like shit faced.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Tuesday night, you weren't getting crushed and
right.
And what have you. But
you have a couple of drinks with dinner, and then it's over. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
So it was good. Yeah, it was good. And then they loved holidays. Holidays were great. So New Year's went from I barely even remember. I think maybe the 29th through like the 10th of January. It was New Year's and Christmas and various other holidays all crushed together, and it was just a big party for a couple of weeks. And it was that kind of thing. But I mean, the people were basically the same as everywhere else. And some good people, some not so great people. But
of course,
just pretty much what it was. But very, very helpful, very hospitable. A real culture of hospitality. And
you basically weren't working very much at all.
I was working, but it was, from what I had been doing,
right.
It was
relatively,
right. It was maybe 3 hours a day or something like that.
Oh, man.
Compared to what I had been doing was, nuts.
So that felt like retirement almost.
Yeah, and then I didn't have a car, so I always had to walk back to my apartment, which was quite a ways away from the university. So all the pounds I'd packed on while I was stressing out in the rat race,
yeah,
all fell off, and that was nice. Unfortunately, they're back now, but but it was it was a
the
good
U.S.
break.
does that too. Yeah, it sounds like you had a blast, right?
It does, yeah. So yeah, definitely. If you ever get a chance to go to Siberia, thumbs up.
Wow. Now I've heard so were you still like a young single man at this point?
I was.
Yeah.
I was. And yes, I almost got married, but
See?
fell through.
I knew it.
Yes. No, it was a close thing, but yeah, a couple of the other people that I ended up meeting over there, other Americans that came through, did get married. And, as we were discussing beforehand, before the interview, they all ended up in the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. But
and that felt like home to the native Russians.
Yeah, I think it did. I don't know. Maybe they're just naturally drawn there. I don't know what it was, but
right.
But yeah, no, it was it was interesting. Plus, the city where I was at, there hadn't been very many foreigners. And so, there was a certain uniqueness just to the fact that we were American.
Right.
And then, they had a beer called Baikal. Yeah, I think it was Baikal. Baikal's a huge lake in Russia, freshwater lake. And the beer was, everybody liked drinking vodka and it could really wipe you out. So I was just drinking beer instead and just get hammered drinking this stuff, and then subsequently found out that it had vodka in the beer.
Oh, wow.
So, you have a couple beers and be like, oh, God, I can barely drink. What is this?
Wow.
Yeah. So it was always,
that's an interesting time. Yeah, that's interesting. Well, yeah. I worked with a lot of dudes that in the military that went to like the Eastern Bloc countries, the right. former Soviet Union that are now like their own, all the stands, like Kyrgyzstan and not Afghanistan, but like Uzbekistan and all those stands. We were sending folks over there, and they'd come back and tell stories of the land of the walking Barbie doll. And who knew?
Yeah, it's,
right. Now it's kind of common knowledge, right? Because there's an internet, right? But back then it's like, really, what?
Yeah, the amazing thing in Siberia was that, it would get cold in the winter. I mean, 20, 25, 30 degrees below zero. And you'd be walking around and there would be, you'd see everybody bundled up, but they were bundled up in these huge leather, full-length coats. And then you would get into school or wherever, it was warm. They'd take these things off and everybody's in, mini dresses. And yeah, like the high-cheeked woman, high-cheeked faces in that
right.
profile. Yeah, you were definitely.
Well, yeah, you're a young single dude, so you're having a good time.
It was not a bad year.
Good for you.
Yes.
All right. So now you come back to the States, and eventually, let's talk about what the internet was like when you first started, and what sort of law practice or sort of like issues you were dealing with in the early 2000s to begin with.
Sure. About that time, it was, very much the wild, wild west. People were referring to the internet as that because there weren't really
There were no laws. Right. Right. Yeah.
And so you had different groups trying to come up with, different ideas on how to deal with it. And the U.S. kind of led the way because the internet was initially established here. And so you had just basic, concepts like, can you sign a contract online? Can you, can you copy a photo and paste it somewhere else? And the federal government in 1998 passed a whole bevy of laws trying to address those issues, and they actually were very pro growth on the web. So government laws tend to be very regulatory and very limiting, which is kind of what we're seeing now. But at that time, they passed laws like the DMCA, the Communications Decency Act, and all of these laws. And what basically the common theme of these laws was that if the website wasn't actively involved in whatever the illegal issue was, they usually had a safe harbor immunity, which means that they couldn't be held liable. So think about Facebook. And people, they post all kinds of stuff to their pages.
Right,
often, often a lot of it's copyright infringement. From a technical perspective, there's no way Facebook can monitor all that. So under the DMCA, they're given immunity so long as they follow a particular compliance process.
Right. So they have to have procedures in place to actively try to remove it, sort of idea.
Right. So they receive a complaint, then they have to act on it. And there's a set of procedures that they have to follow.
Yeah.
And then any site can do that. But if that law had not existed, we wouldn't have YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any of these things.
Right. And you could say the same thing about like things like hate speech and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Right. Anything that people would think of as, hey, right.
Yeah. Well, in fact, that law, the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, is the key. What that section says, it's just a simple summary of it, is basically that a website is not liable for any kind of claim based on publishing for anything that's published by users. So what that means in the real world is defamation, libel, these kinds of things, slander. Right. So if somebody does go on and do hate speech, or they say something horrible about somebody else, the site cannot be held liable for that. Now, you can obviously go after the person that said it. Right. But this is kind of the law that Yelp and all these groups kind of uses their foundational law to allow reviews and not take reviews down, what have you. That law is actually being attacked right now, and Congress is looking at limiting it, and there's great concern about where that's going to go. The weird thing about that law is it's the Communications Decency Act, and so it kind of suggests that it was meant to deal with something a little different than what we're talking about, and it was really meant to deal with online porn. Right. They were trying to find a way to limit it and regulate it. Well,
apparently that didn't work.
Well, there's real problems doing that from free speech perspective, but politicians love to try anyways because it's good for their political career. Look at me, I'm fighting this. Yeah. That law didn't even get out of the gates. The Supreme Court didn't even. No. They put the kibosh on it right away and eliminated a lot of it. But this one section was still allowed. So this foundational law that really sets up a lot of the internet and protects a lot of sites is actually a part of a law that was
intended to be something else, right?
Right. Exactly.
I bet you that happens all the time.
It does. And the rest of the law was actually ruled unconstitutional. So you have this, one section of the law that's binding, that nobody really cared about when it was actually drafted. So it literally comes down to that kind of an odd mistake. And so now you move forward 18 years, and governments are waking up and they're starting to try to, grab territory online. And they're issuing different laws, and often those laws conflict with each other. So it's kind of a brave new world out there right now.
Right. Well, I know when I set up my my websites for my podcast, the people that I worked with that were giving me advice were saying, there's a couple of legal things that you have to deal with. And I think like most of them were, how to deal with people's privacy, right? So that's still a real big deal, right?
Yes, and probably growing more so. Depends on, one of the problems with the web, one of the great things about the web is it's worldwide. Right. One of the problems with the web is it's worldwide.
So, love those, yeah.
Right. So in the U.S., privacy is a bit of a joke. We're what's called an opt-out country, which means that in most situations I can sweep up, as an online business, I can sweep up all the information I can find about you, and I don't have to stop unless you affirmatively opt out. And so, Facebook, Google, their whole business models are built on this concept, and they scrape up all your information. They put it into a big group, they monetize it and sell it to advertisers. In most other countries now, or economic regions such as the EU, they're turning to an opt-in philosophy. So the EU has a new general data protection regulation going into effect in May. And it's all opt-in, and they want to see you. You have to have a legal basis for collecting information. You have to, potentially get consent. It just kind of depends on your business model. But you can't collect anything unless you go ahead and, first get consent. And then you have to follow a bunch of record-keeping requirements. And how you get consent has to be done in a specific way. And it's just kind of a nightmare. And it's a completely different business model than we have here. So what do? How do you comply?
Yeah, because we're not, I don't think something that tight would work here. Am I wrong?
No, you're absolutely right. It's an inherent conflict. And the two regions have been trying to figure it out. And, the problem is, particularly with that regulation.
Good, but from a principles standpoint, but it just seems really hard to implement.
Well, the other thing about it is they don't really put limits on it in relation to the size of the online business. So it applies, the same regulations that apply to Facebook apply to somebody starting a blog tomorrow.
Right. Sure.
And it's ludicrous.
And it would be easy for a blogger, basically, I would imagine, because, nobody really is there, right? But if you're Google, oh my God.
Well, yeah, but the problem for the blogger is that, a lot of it requires,
right?
yeah, they don't have the resources to comply. A lot of it's going to require programming and different things. And my hope is, over the next 8 months, we're going to see technological solutions, provided that will help with a lot of that. But, frankly, a lot of the businesses online are too small to even hire an attorney, so they don't even know this is coming. And fines are up to $20 million, 20 million euros, or 4% of your worldwide income.
Wow.
Right. And so then there are all kinds of questions. Well, if you're a U.S. business, does this apply to you or not? And, the EU takes a position that if you're selling to, their citizens, or you're providing services, even if it's free, even if you're not charging, so if you're giving away like a free ebook or something of this sort, that in their view it applies.
Holy cow.
Yeah, big holy cow.
Wow.
So the problem that
so
you
that
have
means
is,
if somebody downloads my podcast in France, this applies to me.
well, not
What
necessarily.
information am I collecting, really?
Yeah, are you collecting information? But then they also look at this test. Well, it's sort of a test where they say, you have to look at what the intention is of the site. So are you, are you providing any information in the language of, the destination country in the EU? Do you use a domain for them? Do you allow them to pay with, a currency other than the US dollar? There are these kinds of issues that you can look at, but the problem is that isn't a black line test. It's not black and white. They're just saying there's some factors out there you should look at. Well, as a lawyer, what am I supposed to tell my business clients? Well, maybe, maybe you're okay, maybe you're not, and they don't provide any compliant. They don't provide, the EU's not providing any guidance on these issues.
Wow.
And so it becomes, kind of a white knuckler. Now the hope obviously is that when May rolls around, that they'll go after some of the bigger companies and it'll get litigated and then we'll see rules. But, Germany and France, some of these places are known to be, kind of jerks about these things. And I wouldn't be surprised if they went after smaller people.
Right.
So
I get it, because I don't know if I've noticed this more often in the U.S. now in privacy, right? My phone is very much like Big Brother in my pocket, right?
Absolutely.
Every time I leave a restaurant, it's asking me to give them a review. When did this start happening?
No, absolutely.
It's crazy. And, I'm getting to the point now where I turn off my mobile data unless I need it. But I inevitably turn it on because, while you're sitting there waiting for your pho to show up at the Thai restaurant or Vietnamese restaurant, you want to check your email. And then they asked me for a review. Hey, I didn't tell you I was coming to this restaurant.
No, you're absolutely right.
Right.
And, that's why I say privacy in the U.S. is a bit of a joke. It's because, that's exactly what you have happening. And now as we turn to the next evolution of the web, which is Internet of Things devices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like every time you put something in your fridge, it'll be like, hey, how'd you like that?
Literally. Well,
literally.
You look at Amazon. Amazon is, they have that new little video camera device you can put in your bedroom.
Oh,
and
geez.
you can try on different outfits.
Oh, wow.
And,
That's
and
the first time I heard that is Big Brother.
Right. And it sends it out to a group of your friends who you've designated, and they can tell you, yeah, it looks good or no, it doesn't. And the obvious monetizations, Amazon's going to start offering you, clothes and things of that sort, I'm assuming. But, at that point, what is
now they've
privacy?
got a camera in your house.
Well, and you're voluntarily putting it there.
Right.
This isn't a situation where you're being forced. So
No.
And there are implications that people don't even think about with Amazon Echo. And I don't mean to pick on Amazon. This is true
We'll
with the
pick
other.
on Google later. Yeah.
Yeah. With Amazon Echo, though, there was a case not too long ago where they resolved a murder case. And basically, it was a couple in a house, and the man called in and said that they'd been robbed. Somebody had broken in, and during the robbery, they had killed his wife.
Oh, my God.
And
wow.
They were looking into it. They had questions about it. And then, they ran back the recordings through the Amazon Echoes that they had in the house. And it turned out that the man had killed his wife. They had an argument, and he had killed him. And that evidence was used to convict him.
Wow.
Which is good, except I'm not sure a lot of people realize that, all their stuff is being recorded and sent up to the cloud.
Jeez.
And so you get into that, and then you get into issues of security, the Equifax situation.
That's nuts.
They have that the Equifax hack. What a lot of people don't realize is there are different levels of hacks. The Equifax hack's what's called a Holy Grail hack. And the reason for that is that not only did they get credit cards, but they got name, address, and your social security number. Social security number is very important,
right?
Because it makes it easy to go out and open credit accounts. They can file tax returns. So, the first week the tax returns are allowed in, 2018. Somebody has your social security number, they could file a tax return and claim a big refund.
Wow.
And the IRS kicks that refund out to them. And then, you're sitting there, you file, in April or whenever. And the IRS says, well, we already have a tax return from you. And, we already gave you a big refund. And you're standing there going, what?
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. So the Equifax hack is just a nasty thing. But again, it's a situation where you can see that they've pulled all this information. And, the old cliche is, information is power these days. Well, it's really true. I mean, it really is. And, the hackers are so far ahead of any of the security people that, 0 days are always going to be an issue. 0 days are errors in code that people, company doesn't know.
Right.
So this isn't going to be like a one-time event. It's going to be fairly common.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of questions about how do you deal with all of these issues, and unfortunately, we're so far behind in even considering most of them that it's just kind of all over the place.
It's scary. It's really scary. So let's get back to this thing about because this is for me because I have a website. Sure. You're saying I shouldn't promise to not sell, share, rent, or the personal information could kill my business in the long run.
Right, depending on the type of site you have. The vast majority of websites and apps, the value in that is the customer list and the mailing list, if you have a mailing list.
Right.
So if you promise those people when they sign up that you will not sell, share, or rent their information, and you go to sell the site or the app, you're selling that information. So you're violating your own privacy policy, and the FTC and courts have uniformly, rejected sales because of that. The famous case was True.com. True.com was a dating site. The parent company had some problems, and one thing led to another, and they all ended up in bankruptcy. And another dating site called Plenty of Fish tried to come in and buy the member database from True.com for $700,000. And a bunch of states objected to that for the very reason that True.com had said, we will not sell, share, or rent your personal information. And the court upheld that and invalidated the sale.
Wow.
Radio Shack's had problems with it, and plenty of other companies have had problems too. So privacy, is something that, although it is a bit of a joke in the U.S., it's something that now people need to be thinking about, because not only do you need to think about as part of your business strategy, but with other countries really emphasizing privacy, there's going to be quite a crackdown on the web, if you will, as to what people expect from a site. Because if they're going to a site that's based in the EU or somewhere of that sort where privacy is tight, and they're seeing all these warnings and things that they have to check to give approval to, and then they go to your site and they don't see any of that, eventually you're going to start running into some credibility issues.
Wow. Now I'm going to have to go check my privacy page. Because
that's a common.
I used like one of these template generators, right? Where you fill out a form online and then it generates this web text for you, and it's supposed to be a good privacy page. I'll be honest with you, I didn't read it that much.
Nope.
I better go read that.
Yeah, the problem with the generators or free sets out there, what have you, is that the internet has evolved beyond the basic site, if you will. In 2003, you could probably get away with something like that because there wasn't a lot of law, there weren't a lot of legal decisions, and so you could just basically use a one size fits all, if you will.
It's a boilerplate type of document. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that age is gone, and if you don't believe that, or you have doubts about that, and you have Apple products, think about how many times they make you agree to their terms.
Yeah, it seems like every year from every company, it's like, we've updated our privacy policy. You need to read it. And, who does, right?
Right. No, exactly.
Right. But they're doing that. Have to send it to you. Yeah.
Right. And they're making those changes because they want to reflect, recent case law, new laws, different things of that sort. So in May, for instance, with the new European regulation coming into effect, you're going to get a wave of emails saying, this, that, and the other about changes that they've made. Because the problem that companies have online is, how do you partition locations? And it used to be said, the thought used to be that you could use IP addresses. You could figure out what all the IP addresses were in Europe, and you could just block those. If you had few sales in Europe, why comply? Instead, you can just block all the traffic. But so many people use phones now, and phones are much harder to track.
That's true.
And so it becomes an issue of, do you just risk it, or how does all of this work? And it's a complex area and a bit of an ugly area. So for most businesses, they're trying to do the best they can, and then they're making sure that they have large liability policies.
This is weird because I have no idea why, but when I check my stats, the number one country is the U.S. and the number two country is France.
All right. Well,
hello, France. Thanks for listening. But I don't get that. But now I'm going to have to figure out what to do about my privacy policy in the EU, and I have until May.
Right.
Thanks for making me sweat until May. I appreciate that.
No, told you in April.
That's true. That's true. At least forewarned, right? Forearmed.
Yeah, I mean, again, has to be a certain amount of rational logic to, who would they look at and those kinds of things.
No, I'm sure I'm fine because, I'm not even selling anything.
Right.
And my podcast isn't in French. So it seems like I'm probably okay. But I'm pretty sure that template said that I promised I'm not going to sell, share, or rent. So that jumped out at me. So that means I need to get some new language in there that says something new and sneaky.
Yeah. Right. Well, it doesn't need to be sneaky, particularly privacy policy. You just need to be transparent. I think that's what most people are looking at.
Right.
What the FTC governs privacy policies in the U.S. for the most part, and what they're looking at is, do you breach what you say in your privacy policy?
Right. So, whatever you write down, make sure you do that.
Right, and it needs to reflect that. And the problem is a lot of people use templates or steal their terms from some other site, and and they're violating what's in that document because they never really looked at it. And
it's like the worst sin in the military too, because I don't know if you've got any experience with military sort of inspections, but when your inspector general would come out and do your compliance inspections, the first thing the pre-team, 6 months before your scheduled inspection team showed up, they would be saying hello to your commander and saying, hey, have your admin guy send us electronic copies of all of your operating instructions. That's the first thing they do because they're inspecting you against what you say you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Same idea.
Well, no, and I think that's true for any business. When I was doing insurance litigation, it was called bad faith insurance. And basically what it looked at was situations where an insurance company said, we're the good hands people, will protect you. And then something happened that was going to cost the insurance a lot of money, and they would reject the claim. And then you would say, well, you rejected the claim improperly. You shouldn't have done that. So on and so forth, and you did it in bad faith. And the way that you would prove that was often, pulling out their manuals and going through their manuals and saying, well, your manual says you were supposed to do this, but you didn't do it, did you? And that kind of a thing. And you could just build up this whole trail where they just completely abandoned their manual they were supposed
and their lawyers are saying, but loophole A says loophole B says loophole C, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they were trying to say.
Right.
It just came down to who the jury or judge believed. But if you could paint a long line of areas where they had moved away from their own manual, then you were in pretty good shape going against them.
Wow. Scary world.
Complex world. Yes.
Yeah.
It is a complex world. And it's a shame with the web, to be honest with you. There are some people who feel that the web's going to be partitioned up into different economic groups and perhaps political groups. And unfortunately, I happen to agree with them. I think that you're going to see a lot of
more divisions, and it's not going to be wide open.
Well, with the new European regulation, if I have a client that doesn't do any sales in Europe or does one or two, and they, they're looking at a compliance cost of 10 grand or 15 grand or something of that sort, isn't it better just to try to, block everything from Europe and then, make sure that, any sales on the site or any newsletter signups or things of that sort, that the people have to check a box saying they're not from Europe,
Wow.
essentially blocking them. Well, it's cheaper.
I get it. No, it makes sense from a business point of view. It's just from an internet freedom kind of thing. It's just sad. That's all.
No, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
The particularly sad thing about it is so many people who are fired up about internet freedom are just completely missing this. And it's already happening. So in Russia, Russia passed a law that said basically if you're collecting your information from its citizens, they want you to have a set of servers in Russia that has that information.
Whoa.
You can play the ominous music with that.
Bum, bum, bum.
Yeah. And Google and Yahoo and, Facebooks of the world have all complied. LinkedIn of all companies did not. And so Google blocked LinkedIn. And so if you were in Russia and you tried to pull up LinkedIn, you couldn't see it. And I don't know if that's still the case or not, but they did it for quite a while. And so you saw, that happen in China. They just issued a new law that says basically that you can't hide behind anonymity anymore. They're going to essentially get rid of anonymity. So, you go into the comments section of practically any site these days online, you see just people saying horrible things. In China, that's going to be your real name up there.
Well, that's good, actually. I'm okay with that.
Right. So, but you're seeing these different changes in different areas. Yeah. And the question is, how do you harmonize all of that? And if you're Facebook or you're Google, you have the money to address those issues.
Yeah. But if you're Blogger Joe, probably.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And to be honest, the vast majority of my clients don't.
Right.
And where do you start and where do you end? If you comply with every law in every country, you end up with a website that's 1/10 content and 9/10 warnings and pop-up boxes, and it's ludicrous. It's
stupid.
And it defeats the whole concept of what the internet was really intended to be. And while it's become a massive commercial medium, which wasn't really the intent, that's still better.
That's where we are. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's going to have to be a debate on that. And the problem is, it doesn't look like the debate's really happening except in, circles like I'm in. And I think people are going to be shocked in 5 or 10 years at, what they can see and can't see.
Yeah. I mean, we hear stories about like countries like China and North Korea, sort of like getting in trouble. And, I know what happened to that one big case where the EU was trying to get one of the companies to pay them. I can't remember which company it was, like eBay or PayPal or Facebook or something like that.
Well, the EU's pretty much done battle against all the major U.S. companies.
Really? Okay. I just heard about one of them on the news, I thought.
Yeah, a lot of this is economic warfare. They went after Apple.
Oh, Apple. That's what it was. I think
right.
That's
Apple had so you could pick a jurisdiction in the EU if you were going to be there and had to comply with their jurisdiction or their regulations and laws. It was a tax issue, and what had happened was Ireland. Yeah, I think Ireland had issued local laws or something of that sort, or created some kind of a minimum tax zone or something. And so all the U.S. companies were moving there, and Apple was one of the biggest ones. And so what Apple was, I don't know the specifics of it, but the general idea was Apple was trying to move all the revenue it earned in those member states in the EU to Ireland, and then they would pay the much lower tax. And the EU, got bent about that because basically they missed out on billions in taxes.
So they sent them a bill.
Well, essentially, yes. And, but Ireland argued under the regulation that, Ireland really controlled that issue, not the EU. And so it was Ireland and the EU fighting, and then the EU and Apple fighting. And I don't think it's been resolved yet. But you're seeing it.
I don't think Apple wants to pay.
No. Well, that's the problem. That's the problem with the EU. You're seeing, a whole different set of values and a whole different set of norms for conducting business that you don't see in the U.S. So I'll give you an example. Google got caught red-handed, basically hacking into the Apple Safari browser, and it was tracking people for profiling purposes. And they didn't call it hacking, but they gave it some nice politically correct name. If you or I had done that, we would have gone to jail.
Wow. Really?
Google,
wow.
Yeah. Google ended up paying a fine of, I think, $20 million, which sounds like a lot. But think
not
about
to
the
Google.
Revenue.
Right.
It was nothing.
Kind of a slap in the wrist kind of thing.
Yeah, not even that, really. Just kind of a faint wag of the finger, maybe. But,
wow, 20 million wag of at the finger. Yikes,
well,
that's a lot of money. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Again, to you and I, but not to Google. Now, this year in the EU argued that Google's one of the things, if you ever worked in SEO, the SEO field, one of the things that aggravates you to no end about Google is Google is always adding things to the search results pages. And it ends up moving the organic rankings down. So they, they'll answer questions. They'll have Google Maps. All these things are all Google properties. And a lot of people have complained that that's antitrust. It's unfair competition because Google's emphasizing its own products.
Right.
And in the U.S.,
the top three results are always ads kind of thing.
Right. And then down the right column and,
Right.
And sometimes they'll give you an answer that they're actually taking from another site. Often Wikipedia and that kind of a thing. But so anyways, a lot of people have argued that's antitrust in the U.S. and the FTC has just never really done anything. They've always just kind of cowardly walked away from it. Well, in the EU, Google was just fined, I think, I want to say $2.7 billion.
Wow.
For antitrust. Now that's a figure that gets their attention.
Yeah.
And they were fined that in relation to their search results. And what the EU regulatory group said is that's antitrust. It's unfair competition. Basically, the argument a lot of people here have been making. And so you can see it's just a different mentality in the different countries. The U.S. is very deregulated on these issues. And the EU is very regulated on it.
Right.
And so you're seeing this clash. In relation to how this happens. And it goes on with other countries too, the U.S. and Asia. There's definitely issues there. The difference is most U.S. retailers, particularly smaller businesses, don't cater to Asia.
Right.
So it's not the issue that it is.
So you're not worried about having to comply with any Japanese or Chinese laws for the most part. Right. Because you're not doing direct sales. And, a lot of times, if people want to do business in Asia, they go to Asia and do business.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the other key is, you really have to, not only do you go to Asia, but if you're going to make that decision because of the significant language differences and cultural differences, you're exactly right. You're really going to create a whole business department or maybe even a whole new subsidiary that just does that.
Right.
And then,
and then you're set up. So you're going to obviously have to, it's not even aren't we, we're already decided to do it. Right. Yeah.
Right. And as part of that decision, you're thinking of the legal issues and, you're going through all that. And so, no, you're absolutely
Whereas with
right.
Europe, there's plenty of people all over Europe that speak English that can just kind of come on over and, hey, look, this .com works just as well over here.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, look at your traffic. If France is your second, biggest audience,
it's amazing.
Then obviously they're doing that. In France, again, I'll give you a different situation. It just shows you how different the views are. So in Facebook, if you go on Facebook all the time, one of the great things about Facebook is you can keep in touch with your extended family. And somebody has a baby, and you can they'll post pictures as they're getting growing up. In France, that's a misdemeanor, and you can be put in jail for up to a year.
What? Wait a minute.
Because you're violating the privacy rights of the child.
Wow.
Right. So a parent who publishes that, the child didn't consent to it. And so, the idea is that you're embarrassing the child or, maybe child pornography or not child pornography, but child molesters are out there.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's obviously a whole different take on that situation.
Yeah.
And so.
So no baby pictures on Facebook in France or Europe or wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
It is.
Well, it's not nuts. It's their thing. It's just from my perspective, it seems a little nuts.
Right. And if you think about it and you think it through, you can understand the reason why they might go in that direction. But that's much more in the EU. The government is much more of a parent to people than it is here.
Right.
Here we disavow the government as much as possible.
It's like a necessary evil here, right?
Right. Yeah. And over there, they tend to look to the government, or at least the government's role in their society, tends to be much more invasive than it is here. And so you get these different views, and you get into questions of, then how do you possibly marry up those two situations? And for bigger companies, as we discussed with Asia, they're doing similar things. They'll just form a different company. In those cases. So Spain in the EU, for instance, has some strange laws regarding copyright, and they don't really like compiling. So they don't like a site that accumulates, goes out and gets a bunch of headlines from different sites and publishes those with links. They don't like that. They consider it a form of copyright infringement.
Wow.
And so Google actually formed Google Spain, and it's an entity that is just in Spain, and it just complies with all the Spanish laws and everything that's strange about Spain. And that's wonderful and all, but
not everybody's Google.
Yeah, very few people are Google. And
right.
So now in the real world, now that sounds terrifying. In the real world, would they come after most small businesses? No,
probably not. It's not worth the time or effort, right?
Right, but you can't promise, as a lawyer, you can't promise your clients that they wouldn't be unfortunate to be the one that they do come after.
That's
and
true.
So and the other issues, as a business grows, and it starts, at what point do you cross that line where it starts becoming a concern? And how do you address those issues and how do you deal with those? And the one positive side to all of this is the web. The beauty of entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs are realizing that these legal messes are an opportunity to create solutions that they can make a lot of money off of.
Right.
So
of course, all problems are opportunities.
Right. So creating so going back to the EU privacy regulation goes into effect in May. There are people out there that have created plugins for WordPress that put up the consent request. They'd ask all the consent requests, and they have a login where the person can log in and see their information that's been collected. That does a lot of the technical steps that you have to do to comply. And so it solves a lot of that issue. And that's great. And that's where you see technology coming in and really fixing a lot of these questions. The thing that makes people nervous with that particular regulation is that, we're 8 months away and we haven't seen a lot of that because it's so freaking complex. It's difficult to come up with a solution. A couple of companies have, Consent IQ is one. But, and then what are they going to charge for it? These aren't going to be free plugins because they're so technically
the thing I like about most plugins that I like is usually they're a one-time fee kind of thing,
right?
Instead of a monthly subscription, which I'm an advocate of. Paying one time, So if it's a one-time buy plugin that'll solve a problem, I'm okay with that. But here's the other thing: is when you're a podcaster, which who knows whether or not a lot of these privacy issues are going to apply to a podcast or not. I don't know. But the thing that you want to do with a podcast is it's not just about the website, right? You want to distribute it and syndicate it as far and wide as you can. So It's on iTunes, it's on Stitcher, it's on SoundCloud, my host, which happens to be a European company. That's probably going to be a thing that I have to deal with. It's everywhere, and I want it to be everywhere. But that means that now it's originating from my website, but then it goes far and wide, and can I be legally responsible for other people's websites? Maybe I'm covered under that other thing, right? I don't know. I have no idea.
It's an interesting question. Well, that's what I haven't thought of. One of the odd things about the new EU regulation is that they used to focus on controllers, which are basically websites and apps. Now they also focus on processors, which are basically the vendors that you use. So if you have an email list, let's say you use MailChimp, they're going to look not only at you, but at MailChimp. Wow. And they want you to have contract clauses, in your agreement with MailChimp. That essentially, MailChimp's going to comply with, the new GDPR, the new regulation, and all of these things. And I've kind of been surprised that you haven't seen a lot of vendors come forward with these yet, because
they're still trying to figure it out, I suppose.
Everybody is. The problem with this regulation is I got it right in front of me here, and it's a couple hundred pages long.
Wow.
And it's extremely vague. So you're not going to get a plugin that's going to be a one-time pay, I don't think. And the reason being is there's so many vague issues that the courts are going to have to decide in the EU.
Right.
That plugin is going to have to be updated frequently.
Right.
So
every time there's a new case.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're going to see a whole bunch of them almost immediately. because there are issues that are just so vague, and
so it's not going to be nailed down until some people lose money.
Right. And it's
that's the way law works, essentially, right?
Well, again, and it's their mentality. The group that's in charge of issuing guidance on these things. They have a schedule that they put out. They only cover like 6 subjects out of a whole bunch of different subjects that are confusing, and some of the release dates for the guidance are like a month before the regulation goes into effect. And it's like, really? You're giving us a month?
Wow. Yeah.
It's and now in the defense, they gave us 2 years to get to this point. But the problem is there's just large sections of the regulation that are vague. And you go into LinkedIn or whatever where people are talking about it, and you watch people just argue over these things, and you can see just how vague it is because everybody has a different view as to what does this mean?
No, it doesn't mean that.
Exactly. Clearly, it means yes. Exactly.
And everybody's an expert. Wow. Oh, geez.
Exactly. Only a drunk monkey could think that.
Well, you're gonna be getting clients for a long time, Richard.
I am, but I got to be honest. Privacy is not exactly the area that I'm mostly interested in. So,
really,
yeah,
that's just kind of like where you're going to be stuck.
Yep, exactly. No choice.
Gotcha.
Welcome to the world of privacy. So, so that's kind of where things are going. So it's interesting. I'd encourage people to, try to keep an my on overall developments on the web and see how things are changing.
Yeah. Hire Richard.
My prediction game isn't great. I'd have won the lotto by now, but it is going to be a different medium. Not too far into the future, and that's unfortunate. I don't think it's going to be for the betterment.
It's going to be less free internet for sure.
Yes, it is.
And there's no two bones about it. I can't see another way, But what are you going to do? That's where we're at, right?
Yeah. Well, if you take that into mind, maybe there's an opportunity to see, potential business opportunities out there that could be involved in catering to specific markets or something of that sort.
Right.
And when the law changes, there's always some opportunities out there. It's just a matter of seeing where you think it's coming from and then positioning yourself for it.
So you are Richard Chapo, and you've been a blast. You are at SoCalInternetLawyer.com. Did I get all that right?
Yes, you did.
All right. I will give you the last word before we wrap it up.
The only thing I would say about this, well, first, thanks for having me on. It was great.
You're welcome. It was a blast.
Yeah, definitely. The only thing I would say about these legal issues is, sometimes they're obviously very scary.
Right.
Don't let it get you overwhelmed. Just go sit down and talk with an internet lawyer around you in your area. You can find them on Google. And most of them will give you at least an initial free consult, and just go sit down and talk to them and make sure, you're not running into any problem areas or any serious areas.
Right.
And they can help you. It's just like any other part of your business where there's some to-do items. Maybe you don't like dealing with accounting or what have you. But, work your way through it. And the thing to always realize is that if you work your way through your list, you're in better shape than probably 90% of the other businesses online who aren't even aware of any of these issues. And
right. Thoroughly exposed. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. And if, somebody's looking to prosecute or sue somebody, are they going to pick the company that looks like they're pretty much in compliance, or are they going to pick the company that looks like they haven't done anything?
Wide open. They go for the low-hanging fruit, don't they?
Exactly.
Yes, they do. As always. All right. Hey, this has been a blast. Richard Chapo, SoCalInternetLawyer.com. I appreciate you being here, and have a good one.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. Really had a good time.
All right. Talk to you later.
Okay, you too.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.